A Plaguelands Media production.
Hey everyone, this is Hugh from Plaguelands Media bringing you another book review now. Today is something a little bit strange, a little bit different. So, I'm a huge fan of short story collections. I love when authors kind of put a compilation of short stories together. Writing a short story is really incredibly difficult. You have a limited amount of space, a limited amount of time, and the ending has to kind of pack a punch. So I'm always interested in looking at short story collections and reading short story collections. And a few weeks ago, I stumbled upon the new Abject, Tales of Modern Wonder. Now, how did I stumble across this book? Well, I am a huge fan of a British TV show from back in the day called Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to go and check it out. It's fucking hilarious. You can find the episodes on YouTube. They are just absolutely spectacular. Garth Marenghi, as a character, is really a parody of the horror authors of the 1980s, authors like Sean Hudson and James Herbert and these kind of people. Now, the actor that plays Garth Marenghi, who also wrote and directed Dark Place, is, I should say, an actor called Matthew Holness. And I recently discovered that he is also an author, and he had a short story in this very collection, which led me to go and buy this collection just to get a look at the short story that he wrote. Okay, that's a fairly fucking long-winded introduction as to why I am talking about this book today. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. This book has absolutely changed my mind about short story collections and how they should be read and understood and, heck, even reviewed. Because it's fucking difficult to review a book of short stories. If the short stories are all by the same author, that's great. That's fine. That's easy. You just read them and review them based on your knowledge of that author's work, or maybe even your ignorance of that author's work, as is the case with many Stephen King short story collections that, like especially the older stuff that came out before Stephen King became like mega popular and mega famous. But with a collection like this, where every story is written by a different author, how do you review it? How do you even review it when I only recognize 2 names out of all of the authors in this? One of them being Matthew Holness, of course, whose work I've never read before, and the other one being Ramsey Campbell, who, again, is one of the very famous British horror authors, and I am familiar with his work. So how do you judge? How do you review? How do you even look at a book like this and not just sound like a complete fucking idiot when trying to read and review it? So the first thing I want to do before I even get into talking about any of the stories is talk about the subject matter. Now, the title, The New Abject. This comes from a theory, I guess you could say. Julie Kristeva. I've got notes here because fuck me if I can remember all of this shit. But in 1980, she released a book called Powers of Horror, if I'm getting that right. And she postulated that we, as subjects, fear the stuff that we let go of. Now, when it comes to horror, more specifically body horror, you've seen how people react when there's a hair in their soup. There's toenail clippings, snot, blood, whatever. It's instinctual to be repulsed by that. So some of the stories in this collection deal with that aspect of the abject, that we fear what we let go of, and this comes back to, childhood and leaving the womb and all that. I'm not going to get into the philosophy of the whole thing, but it's a very interesting take, and it is covered very well in the introduction to this collection. However, this isn't a new theory. This is actually piggybacking on an older theory by, I'm going to butcher this guy's name, Georges Bastille, from, I believe, 1934, who came up with this idea of the abject being social abject, as in the remnants discarded from humanity, criminals, traitors, spies, the homeless, these kinds of things. So he talks about that in Abjection and Miserable Forms, I believe is the name of the essay. And so we're kind of looking at two different types of philosophies here. The abject of the physical and the abject of the social. And that's what really kind of blew my mind when I read the introduction. I very rarely read the introduction to short story collections because they're usually bullshit. But this one was incredibly interesting. So with that said, you're going to get quite a mix of stories in this collection. A lot of them dealing with body horror, a lot of them dealing with social rejection. But as it is called Tales of Modern Unease, all of the stories in this collection will kind of make you feel uncomfortable after you read them. And that is a testament to the editors and to the writers of this book. Now, I will say that straight off the bat, there wasn't a story in this collection that I didn't enjoy for whatever reason. Some of them are obviously stronger than others, as you will see. I have actually spoken about a few of these with my partners in crime at Plaguelands Media. But let me just jump straight into the next episode of... So, there are 19 short stories in this collection, which in and of itself is pretty impressive. All of the authors are British, and all of the stories are set in England. Does that detract in any way, shape, or form from your enjoyment of reading this book? Fuck no, it doesn't. However, there were a few stories in here that made reference to places that I have actually visited when I traveled to England a few years ago. Places like Waitrose. Those of you that know what Waitrose is, it's a supermarket chain in England, which made me smile and kind of giggle a little bit. Now, the difficulty of reviewing a book of short stories like this is you don't want to give the endings away, because that is the key to a good short story, is the ending always has like a little twist or something to it. So I'm going to try and be as intentionally vague as I can. However, there might be spoilers, to which I wholeheartedly apologize to those of you out there that are interested in this book. And I sincerely hope that a lot of you do pick this up, because it is well worth your time. Now, the first story is by Bernardine Bishop, and it is called Stool. Yep, it's about shit. There you go. There are two women in this story. One of them kind of like helps people in the neighborhood with gardening and things like that, and the other woman had to have part of her bowel removed, and so has a colostomy bag, and cannot understand. She comes home from work one day and there's a shit in her toilet, and she can't understand how it's there because she hasn't actually taken a shit in a long, long time, because she has a colostomy bag, and she starts to think that her body is regrowing the parts of itself that she had to have removed due to her illness, when in actual fact it was just her neighbor that snuck into her house and did a shit because she had used the bathroom and she had a key. Now, on the surface, that sounds fucking stupid. However, I have lived with someone who actually had to use a colostomy bag. I am ashamed to say that I actually went on a colostomy, living with colostomy website, forum, I should say, and my username was shitbag, and they kicked me off. Yep, that happened. I was young, I was dumb, whatever. But it's not an easy thing to not only I've never lived with it, but I've watched someone who has lived with it, and things like the bag breaks and whatnot, especially when you're in public. So this story was a little close to home for me, but ultimately that fear of where did this come from and how did it get there, and is it me? Did I miss something? What's going on? Very, very well written, very, very well told, if not a little bit silly in the execution. Now, the second story, Teeth and Hair by Christine Paulson. This was a little bit obvious. This is a nanny who is looking after a child. The mother has passed away. Pardon me. The father is very, very busy. So she's looking after this child, and it's very reminiscent of Henry James' The Turn of the Screw, in as much as even the nanny is reading the book for her university course. So it's clearly like a Turn of the Screw reference. And the horror comes from the father. When the nanny makes dinner, the father finds hair in his food and teeth in his food, and where did it come from, and did he kill his wife, did he not kill his wife? It's a good little kind of ghost story, but ultimately one of the weaker stories in the collection. The Universal Stain Remover by Gaia Holmes was very interesting insofar as the main character is obsessive compulsive, and her job is to house sit, but as she's house sitting, she cleans every part of the house, making sure not to leave any stains behind. And as you go through the story, as you go through her kind of narrative on what she does and how she cleans the stains, you find out that her ex-husband was abusive and kind of put her down. And ultimately, she gets revenge on him. And that is kind of removing the biggest stain from her life. It starts out very boring. I will admit, when I started reading this, I was tempted to skip this story. But ultimately, it is a fantastic redemption arc. So very, very well written. Lara Williams, I can't even pronounce the title. Wait a second. There you go. There's the title of the story. This is about a woman who collects the parts of her that kind of fall off, like eyelashes, fingernails, things like that. She's very vain, and ultimately that kind of, her obsession becomes her downfall. It's classic body horror, very well written, very disturbing, especially when her ex-boyfriend kind of confronts her about what's going on, and her body itself starts to kind of reject things. It's pretty fucking gross. I'll give it that much. It's pretty fucking gross. The Reservoir by Mauve Hoey. I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong, and I sincerely apologize for doing that. One of the weaker stories in the collection. This is about a woman who kind of becomes obsessed with the history of the town that she's living in, and the fact that it was built on a reservoir which buried a lot of the old town underwater. And at the same time, there's a murder that has happened, but you don't quite know who did it. Yeah, it's not a good story. In fact, I think it's the weakest of every story in the collection. But that is not to say that the author herself doesn't have great talent, because it's written incredibly well. It's just that I couldn't connect with the subject matter. So the fact that I didn't enjoy it is not based on the author. It's based on my own knowledge of short stories and knowledge of what I expect from a certain amount of horror fiction. The Leftovers, again, kind of a weak story that really is more a character study than anything else, and it doesn't really amount to much. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, when I was preparing to do this video, I actually had to go back and kind of reread parts of it because I'd completely forgotten what the fuck. Margaret Drabble wrote it, and it's just a forgettable story. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm just gonna skip ahead. Again, that's on me. That's not on the author. The author is quite talented. That's just on me. An Inflemishment of Desire by Salim Haddad. Wow. Did by the time I got to this story, the book changed fucking pace really, really quickly. So this story is about a woman who travels from her home in England back to the Middle East to visit family, and in doing so gets caught up in protests and riots. She discovers that these kinds of things actually turn her on, and so she hooks up with a guy, and they have like this wild fucking sex. And all the while her husband back home is kind of trying to get her to come back, but she keeps delaying the trip to have sex with this other guy. And ultimately, this guy's actually quite jealous of her husband, and wants to do things like come inside of her and whatnot to kind of prove his worth. But when she kind of shoots him down, he immediately changes. You never really find out what his story is. You never really find out what her story is, but it's really just this idea of social justice combined with sexual liberation. Really interesting. It's a incredibly well written story, and it's I really don't know how to describe it as much as it's body and morals kind of intertwined, I guess is the best way to describe it. Very well done. Very well written. Bind. Now, this was the story I bought the book for. Matthew Holness. Remember that fucking name. Go and watch Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. You will fucking love it. Bind is one of the creepiest fucking stories in this collection. And it's creepy because initially you don't know what the fuck is going on. A guy has been invited to an art exhibition, and as he goes through the rooms, you find out a little bit about his backstory, and he has a kid and yada yada yada. And all the rooms are to do with plants, grass, this kind of thing, nature. And as he goes through the rooms, he's kind of seeing echoes of himself. which ultimately lead him, and huge spoiler alert here, ultimately lead him to take his own life, which was one of the echoes that he saw as he was going through the rooms. Now, I read this story 3 fucking times. I was so impressed with the writing style. I was impressed with the characterization. But the reason I read it 3 times was because after the first reading, I kind of sat back, which is something you have to do with this book. After every story, you've got to sit back and go, what the fuck did I just read? You've got to decompress. And that's the sign of a good short story collection. Just go and check out, I don't know, An Elegant Young Man by fucking Luke Carman. Or his other book, whatever. Just go read An Elegant Young Man. I'm fucking telling you now. After every story in that collection, you've got to sit back and go, what the fuck did I just read? Do I have to read it again? The answer is likely going to be yes, and you will fucking read it again and enjoy it even more than you did the first time. And that's what happens with this fucking book. Intimate Antipathies. Fucking go and read that one too, because that one's fucking work of genius. Bind, Matthew Holness, absolutely love it. The only story in this collection that I read 3 times. Okay, Rejoice by Sarah Schofield. Rejoice is a great story for a number of reasons. Number one, it deals with COVID, which we all fucking went through for the past, fucking couple of years. And it deals with a woman who lost her husband. Her husband was a nurse, didn't have the right PPE, which was a big problem in a lot of countries, especially Britain, and passed away. So basically she's trying to raise her daughter with the help of her father, and her daughter has become obsessed with old videos of Margaret Thatcher. Now that sounds in and of itself fucking dumb. It's actually darkly hilarious. And by the end of the story, when the father and the daughter have gone to a protest about the lack of care for hospital workers and whatnot in the United Kingdom, and the daughter is spouting lines from Margaret Thatcher's famous speeches, you're laughing along with the other characters in the story. It's really well done. It takes a stupid premise and somehow makes it work. Okay, Adam Merrick's story has the stupidest fucking title in this book. It's a Dinosaur Morph Dum Dum. There we go. Okay. One of the best stories I have ever fucking read. Not just in this collection, but that I've ever fucking read. The premise is a couple has gone to their friend's house because the husband is kind of having a bit of a breakdown, and so the wife invites the husband's friend. The husband's friend brings his own wife, and they go to this house. And at this house, this couple has renovated it with what is called magic reality. So you put on like virtual reality glasses and the house changes. So what you're seeing isn't there, but it is there because it's kind of virtual reality. And they've given the couple whose house it is have given their son a Dinosaur Morph as a virtual reality pet. And they are paranoid that the main couple, who you get the story from their point of view, are going to take their glasses off at any point during the visit. And it becomes this really tense story. Why are they paranoid about this? Is it something to do with the husband? Because we're initially led to believe at the beginning of the story that the husband is having a bit of a breakdown. Is it something to do with the husband? Is he sick? Because you can actually give yourself a magic reality like facelift. So when you have the glasses on, you look different. Your face is better. What's going on? By the end of the story, it's fucking heartbreaking. So skip ahead because I'm gonna fucking spoil this. I've got to spoil this one, but skip ahead if you don't want to. If you don't want to know what happens. Basically, the young son of this couple was attacked by a dog and had his face ripped off. So they've given him a virtual reality makeover, and he never leaves the house because he's so disfigured. And this couple, the wife kind of discovers it by lifting her glasses a little bit and seeing the son for what he is. And then you get this idea. It's just basically it's parents protecting their child from the stigma of being a social pariah because of how he looks after this dog attack. I didn't see that coming as I read the story. Absolutely fantastic. I really loved what the author did with that. Okay, Karen Featherstone, Mrs. Woods. I don't even fucking know how to say that. I'm just going to hold up the title there. Another heartbreaking story, another absolutely fantastic story. So in this story, there's very rare for a fucking short story. In this one, there's kind of a subplot about a website that will kind of show you what your house can be like with different furniture, and it kind of gets gradually more sexual as it goes along. But the main story is a mother who, a young mother, she's 23, her husband is, I think, 46 or 54, and she can't really connect with her child. She doesn't like the name that the father picked for the child. She thinks the name is kind of old-fashioned. So through the course of the story, you see the mother and the child gradually kind of drifting further apart. The child is about 3 years old when the story begins. The father gets a dog to kind of act as a companion for the child, but the dog doesn't like the child. The father prefers the dog. He gets his old nanny to come in and help. The wife and the nanny kind of fight over things, but ultimately it's a story of not being able to connect with your child, but then losing your child at the same time. An incredibly dark ending, which I did not see fucking coming, and I had to put the book down and walk away for a little while because the ending to that story is just so messed up. I mean, I'll read the last line and you can judge for yourself. Bloody muzzle on paws, the dog waited, eager for play. Fuck that shit. Okay, Gerard Woodward, The Honey Gatherers. Really interesting. This is to do with beekeeping and a couple whose bees, they have an apiary and their bees get honey, or get their pollen, I should say, from a certain flower, which affects the honey and kind of makes it an aphrodisiac. So their business kind of grows and a lot of people start to buy their honey. But a beekeeper puts up some apiaries within 1 kilometre, which in Britain is actually illegal. I did look this law up, and it is an actual fucking law. So they go into battle with this kind of beekeeper. Their honey starts to deteriorate in its quality. It turns people violent. There are kind of riots and things, in a huge fight in an ice cream parlor. And so they go and they destroy the rival beekeeper's apiary, at the same time getting stung by bees. And then when they get back home, they discover that all of the bee stings on one person match like where they are on the other person, which in and of itself is freaky. I'm allergic to bees, didn't like this story. only because I'm allergic to bees. And when I say I didn't like this story, I mean it scared the fucking shit out of me. Because, yeah, like me and bee stings, no fucking way. Adobo by Paul Theroux. This is about a retired man who his friends are worried about him. One of them has married a Filipino woman and says, you know, you can go to the Philippines. We can set up some interviews and whatnot, and you can marry whoever you want. So he actually goes over there and meets a woman. They get married. He is a little repulsed by the food at the wedding ceremony because when he looks in the stew, he can see the pig and whatnot. He brings her back to Hawaii. At the same time, there are wild pigs on his land, which he has somewhat befriended. And his wife wants to kill them to make adobo, whatever that is. She kills one of the pigs. The pig is a female that's pregnant. She wants him to get a hunting license so she can kill more pigs. When he goes away to get his hunting license, he comes back and the male pig has actually killed his wife. It was a good story. Like, there's nothing else to it. I could see that as a horror film. It was just very well written. More so that it wasn't graphic, that everything kind of happened off page, so to speak. But Adobo by Paul Theroux, solid story. On Monkeys Without Tails. Okay, interesting. This is about a gentleman who is dying and he kind of collects old things and finds an old bureau and does research into who owned the bureau. And that's about it. Good story. Not one of the better ones in the collection. Alan Beard, The Room Peels. Okay. This was creepy. This is about a man who is a womanizer. His wife discovers what he's done, kicks him out. So he lives in this kind of one-room flat. His son comes over occasionally. He watches his son grow up. He falls in love with a woman. And it's basically him spiraling into madness. Very reminiscent of Edgar Allan Poe or even H.P. Lovecraft, in that the room itself is more of a character than the main character. The room taunts him. And you get kind of his progression from husband to deadbeat dad to lover to spurned lover, and all the while the room itself kind of mocks him until he basically just falls apart. There's also like drugs and shit involved, but that's kind of a side piece. Mark Haddon, Oh Death. I really enjoyed this up until the end. I have to admit, the main character, the narrator, her father has fallen down the stairs. She goes to pick him up at hospital, takes him home. Her brother is there, who's a deadbeat piece of shit. Her mother and father never really gave any time for her. And in the process of kind of making sure her father's okay, this all happens over the span of one night, by the way. In the process of finding out if her father's okay, she goes out into the garage and opens the freezer to get some frozen peas, and there's the body of a child in there, and she comes back in, she's like, what the fuck? And everyone is like, what? You're the one that fucking came here and is causing shit. And she's like, there's a fucking dead kid in the freezer. And the brother goes out and goes, hey, there's a dead kid in the freezer. Then the dead kid comes out of the freezer, treats her like his mother, She puts him in the car, drives to is driving home, stops off on the side of the road, finds a drainage ditch, dumps this kid who is now alive in the drainage ditch and drives off. Like, it was good. Then it got fucked up. And then it kind of made me feel a little sick at the end. So yeah, that was Oh Death. Lucy McKnight Hardy, her story Wretched. This was really cool. This is kind of set in the future, and it's a look at the social classes in Britain, namely like the rich and the poor and the middle class. You've got the wretched, which around up the main character's job is to photograph them so that the police can come and kind of take them away. His wife / girlfriend doesn't want him working for the government, but he's just come out of jail, so it's the only job that he can get. In the meantime, she's sick, so he's trying to get her food. If you want to go into a supermarket, you have to be wealthy and you have to get your card scanned, and there's armed guards. This is where they bring in Waitrose, which cracked me the fuck up. And it very much feels like a Philip K. Dick sci-fi story, which I did enjoy. I thought it was very, very well written. David Constantine, Out of the Blue. Okay, this is one of the most fucked up stories in this collection. You have Ronald, who has the keys to a house. I think he's like a real estate agent or something. And he has his mistress with him. And he says, let's get naked and sunbathe by the pool before we kind of do anything. And this is how you sunbathe properly and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly Ronald is killed. How is Ronald killed? Well, an illegal immigrant who was sneaking into the country via hiding in the wheel well of an aircraft, freezes to death, falls out of the wheel well, and lands on Ronald, completely exploding him and covering the woman in blood and guts. And the rest of the story is her trying to cover up that she was there, and Ronald's wife reaching out to her because she recognizes the number on Ronald's phone. Wacky, crazy, fucking hilarious. Absolutely loved it. There's a certain comedy to be had with the way that Ronald dies, combined with the way the narrator is trying to cover everything up. It was really funny. Now, the final story in the collection, Extending the Family by Ramsey Campbell. Ramsey Campbell, of course, being a very famous horror author. This was a really good way to end this collection. The main character witnesses some squatters in a block of flats. He calls the owner of the block of flats, who doesn't want anything to do with what's going on. He calls social services. They know about the squatters. He calls the police. The squatters lie and kind of spin it so that the narrator seems to be the bad guy. And ultimately, you're led to believe that the narrator is actually going crazy and that he is looking at these squatters, but it's not happening. It's a memory. Incredible, incredible story, and one of Ramsey Campbell's best work. So that is everything in the new Abject, Tales of Modern Unease. There is also the new Uncanny, Tales of Unease, by the same publisher with the same editor writing the introduction, which I really want to look into. But as a short story collection, absolutely fantastic. As I said earlier, it's very hard to judge short story collections when each of the stories is written by a different author. If they're authors that you are familiar with, you can kind of weigh their work against the work they've already done. If they're authors you're not familiar with, what ultimately happens is you weigh their work against other authors in the collection, and that's not always a good thing. I mean, it's inevitable, but is it fair? I highly recommend, if you want a book of stories that is going to make you feel uncomfortable, that's going to make you, after every story, just put it down, take a few steps back, think about what you just read. This is the book for you. Highly recommend it. That is the new Abject, Tales of Modern Unease. Okay. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like, subscribe, do all the stuff at the end. But most importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, it's hot outside. Or, fuck, mate, maybe in Australia it's cold outside, but I don't know. Either way, just go and read a fucking book, people.